Cocktails. I'm Katie from the Wellington County Museum and Archives, and we are in Arthur today, the most patriotic town in all of Canada, and I am standing in front of Silverfox Distilleries. That has a wide variety of unique and very nerdy culture and alcohol, so why don't we go inside, visit with Mark and Lisa, and see what they have to offer.
Hi folks, I'm Mark.
And I'm Lisa.
Townsend, and you're at Silverfox Distillery. The thing that we needed to do was be as local as possible and as conscientious as possible. So all our grains are maple syrup, they're locally produced, and our waste, in a 2-week period, we have 1 bag of garbage. Everything is recycled, reused. Our grains are spent grains. We actually have several farmers, one major farmer, that will pick them up and use them for feed, for chickens, or chickens, pigs, cattle. We don't charge for this. We just arrange that they pick it up. Distillery grains are considered one of the best animal feeds out there. And for us to be able to give it back to the community and the people around here, it means the world to us. The fact that our carbon footprint is so small, that's a huge deal for us.
Okay, so the first drink we're going to make here at Silverfox Distillery is the Mood Changer. First thing I've done is I've rimmed the glass with, I did put a little bit of lemon around it, and I've rimmed it with raw sugar. And then I'm going to put 2 ounces, I've already got an ounce in here, and we've got another ounce of the Moody Blue, goes in with crushed ice into the shaker. We're going to use an ounce of our fox shine. And I'm using about a half an ounce of vanilla bean syrup, which is into the shaker. I'm just going to shake that all up. And we're just going to pour that in here. And then we top with about 3 ounces of Sprite. Just to bring that right up to the... You can kind of wing this one. And as a garnish, a couple of lovely raspberries in there. And there you go. So that is the Mood Changer.
So thanks to Mark and Lisa for telling us a little bit about what makes Silverfox so incredibly unique and special. We're going to chat a little bit about today what it would have been like during the First World War when it comes to prohibition and temperance and alcohol. For many, many, many years, communities all across Wellington County had been battling each other to really talk about and discuss the sale of alcohol, the consumption of alcohol, what it should look like, should it exist, should it not. And for a very short spat there, Wellington County did vote for prohibition with that local option that we talked about before. But that kind of just disappeared within a handful of years. But the First World War changed things. That's when a provincial ban was even able to get to the table. Across Canada, provinces were really thinking about having a provincial ban. And temperance unions and prohibition leagues and all of those people that had been talking about how much they disliked alcohol and that consumption and the sale of alcohol, this was the perfect ammunition that they would use to pounce on creating those discussions again and having rallies. And they would use the entirety of the First World War and the men that went to fight during the First World War as ammunition to get prohibition back into play and to enact it province-wide. So provincial-wide bans were only able to happen because of the First World War. It was sort of seen as a social sacrifice that each person had to individually make to ensure that the First World War went into the direction that they wanted it to. There were actually two trains of thoughts that really went with this idea. One of them was that you were making this sacrifice. You needed to sacrifice your alcohol to ensure that those that were across Europe could fight. Or in another way of putting it, you were sacrificing having alcohol while the boys in Europe could not. And then number two was that they wanted the veterans coming back to Canada to come back to a country that was better than the one that they left. It was smart, using politics linked with patriotism to get rid of alcohol. And throughout the war, all across Canada, provinces were using these different techniques of that social justice and self-sacrifice to really push for prohibition. And the only province that really didn't follow that suit was, of course, Quebec. They did enact prohibition, but it lasted for even less than a year. But by 1917, every single province, including Ontario, would either have prohibition already enacted or were well on the way to have that happen.
So one of the specialties here we have at Silverfox Distillery is our core peppercorn. Now, we created this solely as a use for a new style of Canadian Caesar. It's won several awards over the year and a half. It also marinates steaks incredibly well. So we'll take this. One of the first things we're going to do is we're going to rim the glass, and we're going to use a little lemon juice on the edge of the glass. And we'll throw it actually. Now we're using the Singer's spice, but a steak spice is also excellent in there as well. So we'll take the 4 peppercorn, we'll do an ounce and half of that. We'll put that in. And you can use Clamato, it's fine, it's up to you. The pickled bean Clamato, the regular Clamato is good. We actually have the Singer's smoking. So it adds a bit of a smoked flavor to our Caesar. And we're gonna put that in. We're gonna put our little lime on here. Lemon. It's not green, is it? Can't have one without olives. And a little bit of a sour stick. So, there is the Silverfox Caesar. So late in the 1800s, one of the favorite and the best-selling spirit was absinthe. Now, absinthe got a reputation of being a product that created hallucinations, which it possibly could. The only issue is that because absinthe is typically a very high percentage of alcohol, ours being at 67.5, you will actually get an alcohol poisoning long before you'd ever get the effects, the hallucinogenic effects from the wormwood and any of the other botanicals inside. Absinthe derives its flavor solely from its botanicals and the processes used to do it. It has seen, as of late, a resurgence, so we're bringing it in, and you can enjoy it straight. A really decent absinthe can be enjoyed just straight. And typically at about an ounce and a half, it's up to you. It is very strong, and that's fine. This is actually called, there are 2 types. There's the white absinthe, which is all the botanicals are done, and then it's run through the still. The green fairy version also has botanicals added to it after it's run through the still as well. So there is actually a whole series of things you can do with this, but there's a process to it. Now, the one process is to sweeten it up because of all the botanicals and the strength of the alcohol. Most people try to sweeten it up a bit and cut it down. Use exceptionally cold water. So this one here is ice into it. There are even special fountains that will drip the water into your absinthe and through a sugar cube. So we have an absinthe spoon here, and we basically just drip it very slowly through the sugar cube. And you see the sugar cube dissolving.
And that's good. We'll just stir it up a bit. And you get a bit of a cloudy feature into here. And that's a good thing, because what you're doing is you're separating the oils, you're pulling the oils out of the spirit. It's called louching. You're bringing it into a bit of a cloud, and this creates a super beverage from the old world, 1800s, 1900s. Enjoy.
So Mark and Lisa has some pretty interesting cocktails and spirits that they've added to their drinks, and they're absolutely delicious. And they're always trying new things and experimenting with what it is that they are creating. So maybe we'll get a sneak peek of one of their new additions that are coming up. Stay tuned. But before we get into that, let's talk a little bit about what soldiers would have been dealing with at the front lines when it comes to alcohol, because there is a really interesting part of history that has to do with this. And they had very clear ideas of how they felt about Canada going dry. So funny enough, while a lot of temperance groups and unions and all of them were really kind of using soldiers as an excuse to enact prohibition across Ontario and specifically in Wellington County, the soldiers that were actually fighting in Europe thought it was a ridiculous idea. They hated it. They thought it was the worst idea that they could have done in Canada as a whole. Because each soldier on the front, they actually received a ration of rum 3 times a week. It was a regular thing that happened for British soldiers at the beginning, and then eventually Canadian soldiers followed suit with that. It was really kind of an important addition to trench warfare. It was a way to boost morale a little bit, sort of bring a little bit more support to the war effort. And it was extremely important to a lot of the boys that were in the trenches, surrounded by thigh-high mud, lice, rats, corpses, all of the things you can imagine they would have been surrounded by. So rum was an important part of that story of surviving through the First World War. So the ration itself, it came in a jug that was labeled SRD. Now there is some division amongst many historians about what those letters actually stand for. The one that makes the most sense for me personally is service rum diluted. Whether or not that's real, not entirely sure, but that's one of the ones that makes sense. The practice of giving soldiers rum as a form of morale booster, it started with the British troops and then was sort of passed on to Canadian troops when they were underneath British leadership in northern or southern Africa, I should say. So the ration that was given to them was half a gill, which is about half a pint, a little bit off from that, but around half of a pint is what they would get 3 times a week. And it was a reward system. So think of your ration of rum as the carrot to an extremely long line of stick circumstances. And this was especially important for a lot of soldiers who were on the front before that 2-week rotation actually started. For a very long time, for many years into the First World War, you could spend a month, 2 months on the front lines fighting with no reprieve. And then eventually they brought in a 2-week rotation system that helped out a lot. So even before that was enacted, having your ration of rum was so incredibly important. The half gill of rum that you would get for your ration for the day would be either given to you at the stand 2 at dawn or the stand down at dusk. And that essentially is just a time of the day when you would get prepared and ready for an enemy attack. And if an enemy did not come after a certain amount of time, you were given your ration of rum for the day. Now this would fall out of fashion, of course, because the enemies would catch on to that theme of when they were at their most prepared. So that would fall out of fashion when they would give their rations out, and they would find other ways to do that. And technically, if you had extra rum, you were supposed to pour that in the mud. This was to ensure that no man got drunk. And reality though, dumping out the rum was almost never occurring. They would always use every single drop of rum because both soldiers and officers saw the importance and the value of rum to their success. It's sort of unfortunate that a lot of soldiers became reliant on alcohol, but very similar to how so many more men were increasing in their smoking habits, soldiers saw alcohol as a way to calm their nerves. It was something to look forward to. It was something to help them sleep, especially with some of the horrors that they had to deal with being on the front. So although most units wouldn't actually pour out their rum, even though they had a little extra, this of course was not always the case. There are accounts from Canadians that soldiers that did drink that extra little bit of rum, they would have a little bit too much, and it would actually endanger themselves and others in their unit, because they did have this notion of being invincible. So with that in mind, a lot of officers in Canada would actually try to enforce that dumping of extra rum into the mud. Sometimes it worked, most of the time it didn't. And for one particular group of northern BC men, it definitely did not really vibe with them. They actually threatened the 54th Battalion officer, their officer, when he tried to withhold their ration of rum. And that officer would learn very harshly not to mess with their rations of rum, especially. So you can imagine what these men were feeling and what they were thinking when the war ended and they came back to Canada and we were dry. So they fought this horrible war. They've become sort of used and had some form of comfort by having these 3 rations of rum each week, and then suddenly you come to a country that's completely dry and they've used you as an excuse to do so. But lucky for them, they wouldn't have to wait for very long for Prohibition to disappear in Canada and Ontario, especially in Quebec, seeing as it only lasted for a year. So although they had a few years of not having that access that they would be used to, it didn't last for very long. And even with that continued discussion from temperance unions and prohibition leagues throughout Ontario and Canada and Wellington County, their fight would end before the 1930s. That's when prohibition would disappear in Ontario. Although in local communities, that local option vote is still available to them. So there are communities across Ontario and in Wellington County that were still dry for decades after the provincial ban was discredited and disappeared. And for some, it would be a very long time until they were able to legally purchase alcohol to enjoy at their home. And some of the ramifications of that tight hold that Ontario had on alcohol still affect us today. It still affects some of our local distilleries. So I always encourage people to visit your local distilleries, like here in Arthur, the most patriotic village in all of Canada because of how many people actually enlisted per our population here in Arthur. It was insane, and it was the most in the entirety of the country. So I encourage you to come down here to Arthur, learn a little bit about our history here and how beautiful it is in this town, and then go visit Mark and Lisa at Silverfox. Take a look around, take a gander at some of their nerd culture in the store, have a couple samples of what they have available, and then maybe you'll actually find a new favorite addition to your cocktail mixes.
So once again, we have playful hearts and we enjoy it. Every Christmas as a child, both Lisa and I, when we bought our children advent calendars, we also bought some too. We decided not to do chocolate ones, so we came up with the Silverfox advent calendar. This is 24 individual doors. Of course, it's mostly sci-fi doors just to create our character. But within them are 24 50 ml bottles, all different. There's no repeat flavors. Everything is an individual flavor. 24. There's 50 mils, basically an ounce each person. Great to share and a great way to go through December. Every day is a surprise.